Well, if you look back to the derivation of the word credit, you actually find out that credit comes from a Latin construct, which actually is where we get a lot of things like credibility. We get a lot of things that have to do with the knowledge that based on who you are as a character, what you are as an organizational character, says something about who you are intrinsically. What is that at the end of the day? Isn't that an intangible? Isn't that intangible value? Of course it is. Okay? Credit is about saying, based on, fill in the accountability metric, I know something about what you are, who you're about, how you're going to perform. So yeah, energetically, I'm saying that what that is a statement that says that the more you have established yourself as accountability, transparency, performance-based in your engagement with the world, the more I can say to you, sure, credit works, because I know the last time I trusted you, you were trustworthy. Interestingly enough, it's where some of the Islamic finance fatwas back from the 17th century become extremely instructive. Because under the Sharia law as it was constructed in finance several centuries ago, the core to Islamic finance that kept it from being debt and usurious, which were prohibited by a number of the fatwas, what was the basis of that prohibition was the lack of transparency. The less you knew about the character of a counterparty, the more prone the transaction was to usury. Isn't it interesting that for all of our frustration in our modern media about Islamic law and the political baggage that's attached to that, there's oddly enough some ancient wisdom on accountability and transparency that's in those fatwas. We could inform ourselves based on the fact that the more you get into asymmetric knowledge, where one party knows less about the other. Think about the subprime mortgage. Think about the no-doc loans. The less counterparties know about each other, the more prone you are to usury. I didn't write that. An Islamic scholar in Persia wrote that 3 centuries ago. And now we're surprised that the financial innovation of no-doc loans has come back to bite us? I think not. That was something that we knew 300 years ago. So debt, which I've talked about before as a restrictive covenant that says, I'm going to hold over you an obligation, and I am not basing this on something that says future performance. I'm saying this is about, you're taking something from me, you will be held accountable to give it back plus something. So the energetics in that relationship are control, very linear, non-synergistic. There is a party who has control, there is a party who has need. That's the relationship. In credit, you actually have to bet for a successful future. You have to say, I'm actually taking a position based on a future energetic. So yeah, those are 2 fundamental issues. And as we think about where the future goes, as we embrace modes of transfer of value that understand that everything doesn't necessarily pass through a currency as we know it today, everything doesn't pass through the metrics that we know today, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where credit is the energetic that we're going to have to use a lot more of, which means we're going to have to inform ourselves about counterparties. We're going to have to inform ourselves about who we're doing business with. So we're going to have to understand the ways in which we can understand that in the dynamics of a value exchange, those dynamics need to be denominated, counted, and measured using metrics which are relevant in context. Do you want to take, for example, a 5-year loan on a shipment of oranges? No, because oranges last 5 days. And unless you have the ability to take the oranges that don't sell, juice them, freeze them, put them in containers that can be sold 5 years later, then the value of a 5-year loan against oranges is a bad idea. However, I just gave you the mechanism to say, if we want to use it in the classic debt or credit structure. We'd want to make sure that whatever isn't sold in the market one day is juiced the next day and is stored the next day. Now what's that? That's just applying creativity and knowledge to a system which says that's about credit. Why? I don't want the orange grower to go out of business because people want oranges. But you know, sometimes people really want a lot of oranges and sometimes they don't want a lot of oranges. So if I haven't thought through the systemics of the value exchange, I'm not thinking in a way that lends itself to a multiplicity of value observations, to a multiplicity of value opportunities, and to a multiplicity of exchanges. A beautiful example of this is in Southern Asia right now, in Central Asia. Under communist structures and central government controls under the former Soviet Union, many of the southern Stan countries had allocations of agriculture production. So for example, there is a particular location in Central Asia, which was where the Communist Party said you grow apricots. Apricots. Why? Because apricots freeze dry very well. They become extremely great additions to MREs for the military, so you can put dried apricots into the food packages and people can have food for, you know, long periods of time stored on shelves. Well, the interesting thing is when the Central Army disbands and you no longer have a need for millions and millions and millions and millions of dried apricots, you have now a huge overproduction of apricots. And this is really happening right now. Fields full of apricots, with those fields full of apricots falling on the ground. Now, ironically, the reason why those apricots are falling on the ground is because nobody actually thought through what I just talked about in my orange example. If you don't sell the apricots to the dried apricot, then what do? You go, hey, guess what? Make jam, make a preserve, extract sugar, do all kinds of things. But that thinking is not there. That thinking is not present if you think about the linearity that is created by debt. Debt says, I'm giving you credit, you have a single performance, our relationship is based on that, and I care not for your success or my success other than the performance of this short-term obligation. Credit, on the other hand, says, I want to succeed out of your fruitfulness. I want to succeed out of your bounty. And I then, as the aligned interest in that conversation, need to see the incumbency on my part to ensure your success. I need to, as Sharia law calls for in finance, I need risk sharing, meaning it is not your performance alone or my credit alone that makes the relationship work. It is when we understand that we both have a responsibility. You, the entrusted, me, the entrustor, but during that relationship, we better have an alignment of interest. Institutional money managers would say, but Dave, that's unreasonable. And I would look at them and say, no, it's not. That's called a diversified portfolio. If I actually have the diversification of the finished good, which is whatever is coming out of that apricot orchard, I also have a piece of whatever the manufacturing process is to make jams and preserves. I also have a piece of the sugar commodity value of what's coming out of that field. I also have all those things. What have I done? I've just created a diversified investment vehicle. Unreasonable? No. It just invokes a responsibility on my part to actually understand the counterparty in the transaction and understand how to manufacture that relationship which will create the bounty out of which goodness can come. Oddly enough, what I've just proposed stands in contrast to, or we could bet against your failure. You make the call. Which one do you want?